This young woman is about to call when the lights of the room starts to flicker, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Curiosity led her to her shoe cabinet, where she was shocked to find her footwear scattered. At that very moment, a ghostly figure of a woman materialized before her. Yet instead of reacting with terror, the girl calmly uttered, "Mother." It turned out the spirit haunting her was her own mother, trying to stop her from buying more shoes. Turned out that the young woman is a gifted exorcist and could see and interact with spirits. On that same day, in a hospital emergency room, Gia encountered a sinister presence. Without hesitation, she pursued the entity, following it all the way to the rooftop. She created a barrier to trap the demon. Just then, her assistant swiftly grabbed his necklace. It trapped the demon inside the assistant's body. Then, Gia subdued her now-possessed ally and drove her enchanted hairpin straight into his chest, forcing the dark entity to exit the assistant's body like a vaporous mist. Meanwhile, in Beom Real Estate, a company specializing in cleansing haunted properties, received a desperate plea for help. A distressed homeowner reported mysterious footsteps echoing across his rooftop at night when no one else was home. As Gia interrogated him, she sensed his reluctance to disclose crucial details. She pointed out that sometimes, fear itself creates illusions, turning ordinary sounds into something far more sinister in the mind of the listener. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to investigate further. Later, Gia arrived at Beom Real Estate with a personal mission to find a shaman capable of helping her mother's soul find peace. In life, her mother had also been an exorcist, and even in death, she remained tethered to their home, protecting the land she once guarded. A spirit lingering in the human realm often signified unresolved matters. However, no ordinary shaman was capable of guiding her mother to the afterlife. Gia tirelessly interviewed candidates, but none met her expectations. In another part of town, a man named In Beom was navigating his own troubles. In Beom had built a life of deception, masquerading as a distinguished PhD in electromagnetic energy research from Stanford University. His targets, the wealthy elite. He would first stage eerie, supernatural disturbances, ominous noises, and unexplainable movements. This time, his scheme had worked flawlessly, leaving him with a substantial payday. Driving away happily, he relished his success until fate messed with his plans. A creditor suddenly appeared, forcing him into a high-speed chase. Fortunately, In Beom managed to escape, and then headed straight to a 5-star hotel where he indulged in his riches. Lounging by the pool, basking in victory. However, beneath the water's surface, something has appeared. A hand that is ghostly and pale. Just as the phantom hands were about to seize him, he suddenly woke up by the side of the pool. As he touched the necklace that his father had entrusted to him, memories of his father's mysterious death resurfaced. At the funeral, his grandmother had wept uncontrollably, insisting that her son's passing was not natural. But In Beom, as always, pushed these unsettling thoughts aside. Turning his attention to the television, he saw news about Korea's real estate market. Smirking, he remarked to his friend that without installment payments, owning a home was impossible, but he had a plan, one that would make them a fortune. He discovered an abandoned property construction had halted when the development company went bankrupt, and the last buyers had met a grim fate, falling to their deaths. The current owner had purchased it at a bargain, but rumors of a curse had made it impossible to rent out. To In Beom, this was the perfect setting for his next con. As the owner goes to the restroom, the wife remained behind. Suddenly, a cold chill filled the air. Little did she know, In Beom and his accomplice, Chi Hyeo, had already rigged the house with a hidden ghost projector. As planned, they activated creaking footsteps and eerie door movements, intending to frighten the couple into believing in the haunting. However, inside the restroom, the husband saw something beyond any trickery: a pair of feet, shrouded in black mist, standing eerily in the stall. This was no illusion. The homeowner saw his wife in a trance-like state, walking toward the rooftop. In a terrifying moment, she stepped onto the ledge, but as he rushed to stop her, he was stunned to realize that the person standing on the edge was not her but him. Reality blurred. Snapping back to his senses, he found his wife pulling him back to safety. As if nothing had happened, the surveillance cameras flickered back to life. Shortly after, In Beom received a call from the wife. She wanted him to cleanse the house. Overjoyed, he and Chihyo celebrated their easy payday. However, the homeowner himself sought a second opinion. He visited Debuk Real Estate, recounting his chilling experience to Jia. Listening intently, Jia immediately recognized the signs of spiritual manipulation. The man had been possessed, but by whom? Digging deeper, she uncovered the property's dark history. The previous owner, deceived by an estate agent, had purchased the unit on installments. When the developer went bankrupt, investors were left desperate and destitute. Two individuals, one being the former owner, the other is the deceitful estate agent, had leapt to their deaths from the building. Determined to solve the mystery, Jia arrived at Unit 401, preparing for an exorcism, not knowing that In Beom had also snuck onto the scene, hoping to avoid detection. She began the ritual, using her sacred artifacts to force the spirit into manifestation. But then, something unexpected happened. A second spirit had revealed itself, the true mastermind behind the hauntings. The deceitful estate agent had not only died, but had bound himself to the soul of his victim. Realizing the magnitude of the situation, Jia decided to return the next day. Meanwhile, In Beom happened to run into the homeowner and his wife. The husband, however, had already made other arrangements. He revealed that he had hired Debuk Real Estate instead. Unlike In Beom's overpriced gadgets, their services only required a small brokerage fee, a far cheaper and more effective solution. For the first time, In Beom realized he might have met his match. Their business scheme had failed, leaving both In Beom and Chihyo fuming. Determined to uncover who had undercut them, they quickly dug into the matter and traced everything back to Debuk Real Estate. That was when they discovered that the person who had intervened was Jia. But before they could interact much, several cars pulled up. It was In Beom's creditors. Meanwhile, the thugs stormed into Jia's home, only to be met with an eerie force from the second floor. In Beom triggered a car alarm. Panicked, they ran back to their vehicles and drove off. Taking advantage of the situation, In Beom put on an act, claiming he was a spiritual researcher drawn to the powerful energy surrounding Jia's home. However, she immediately saw through his deception and called him out as a fraud. That same night, Jia and Hongsik set out to exorcise a ghost. Feeling uneasy, In Beom decided to sneak along, intent on exposing how Jia fooled people. However, in his attempts to observe, he accidentally disrupted the protective barrier they had set up. His interference came at the worst possible moment. The demon found an opening and escaped through a gap in the barrier. In a terrifying turn of events, Hongsik became possessed. He ran toward the rooftop. Jia reacted instantly, grabbing his arm before he could fall. Without hesitation, Jia plunged her enchanted hairpin into Hongsik's chest. The hairpin's power coursed through her, allowing her to see the tragic past of the real estate agent's spirit. Years ago, after an architectural company's bankruptcy, the agent had been left financially ruined. Enraged, he lashed out at his friend, whom he had convinced to invest in the doomed project. As tempers flared, the friend stormed off. In a moment of desperation and malice, the agent picked up a hammer and struck the man from behind, believing he had killed him. Panicked, he staged the scene to make it appear as if the friend had taken his own life over a failed investment. Just as the agent was about to dispose of the body, the injured man suddenly regained consciousness and clutched onto him. The struggle sent both of them plummeting from the building, sealing their tragic fate. Jia successfully banished the agent's soul. Just as she prepared to exorcise the second, Hongsik snapped back to his senses, signaling that the spirit had moved on. But it hadn't vanished entirely, it had found a new host. Jia turned and froze, a chilling aura radiated from In Beom, his body now harboring the homebuyer's spirit. For a brief moment, she caught sight of an unfamiliar figure overlapping his own. Unlike typical possessions, the ghost didn't attack. Instead, it rushed toward the rooftop's flower pot, frantically digging into the soil. Recognizing the significance of the act, Jia seized the opportunity and pierced In Beom's chest with her hairpin. The spirit let out an agonizing wail before vanishing. Curious about what had drawn the spirit to the flower pot, Jia unearthed a small, hidden box. Inside was an item left behind by the homebuyer's father, something deeply significant. Meanwhile, In Beom, now free from possession, remained in shock. He struggled to process what had happened. Jia pressed him for details about his experience, as typical shamans wouldn't retain memories of the spirits that possessed them. This revelation led her to suspect that In In Beom was no ordinary shaman. The encounter had left Hong sick with a severe leg injury, requiring 6 weeks of rest. Jia, accustomed to catching glimpses of spirits' memories during exorcisms, found it odd that she had seen nothing this time. It was as if the memory had been transferred to In Beom instead. She repeatedly questioned him about what he saw, but In Beom hesitated. In his mind, he recalled the homebuyer clutching the box from his father, lingering outside a door, unable to bring himself to knock. However, he chose not to share this detail with Jia. Instead, he accused her of doing something to him during the possession, unwilling to accept the truth of what had transpired. Jia bluntly told him that he was a shaman, someone inherently susceptible to spiritual possession. She explained that her method of exorcism required channeling the spirits into a shaman's body before expelling them. Last night, In Beom had unknowingly taken on that role. True shamans typically wouldn't recall anything after being possessed, but he clearly did. Panicked, In Beom refused to believe it. He vehemently denied any connection to shamanism. As he walked away, he suddenly realized his necklace, the one his father had given him, was missing. He traced his steps back to the moment he had saved Hong sick and realized it must have fallen on the rooftop. He began searching for his necklace. When he finally found it, he realized it was broken. Furious, he blamed Jia for bringing him bad luck. After successfully exorcising the ghost, Jia assisted the homeowner in selling the house without any further issues. As she watched the homeowner leave, she noticed the same gangsters who had previously tried to force her out. This time, they were intimidating a neighboring business family. Debic Real Estate wasn't an ordinary place. It didn't matter how much pressure they faced, they refused to move. To make things even stranger, whenever the gangsters showed up to threaten Jia, they claimed to have seen ghosts. Haxiong, the leader of the operation, found their excuses ridiculous. Enraged, he slapped his subordinate, furious at their incompetence. Since they had failed, he decided he would handle the matter personally. Meanwhile, Jia and her team continued discussing In Beom. She couldn't stop thinking about his abilities as a shaman. Not only had he retained the demon's final memory, but he also showed no fear during the exorcism. It was possible that he was an incredibly powerful shaman. But if that were true, why did he refuse to help her send her mother's soul away? On the other hand, In Beom was equally troubled. He couldn't stop thinking about the homebuyer's final moments. He realized that on the day of the murder, the homebuyer had planned to visit his father to deliver the box. However, before he could do so, he received a call from the real estate agent. The agent claimed he was going to burn the house down and disappear. Worried, the homebuyer rushed to the rooftop to stop him. In the end, the gift he had intended for his father was never delivered. Following the ghost's lingering memories, In Beom unknowingly wandered back to the homebuyer's father's house. When he regained full awareness, he found himself standing outside. The homebuyer's father was sitting outside, smoking in grief over his son's death. Seeing this, In Beom couldn't help but recall his own experiences. After losing his own relatives, he had been left completely alone. At that moment, he realized that he and the father were two people bound by the same fate. Meanwhile, Jia and her team continued investigating In Beom. However, when they searched his name, they found no relevant records. It was as if he didn't exist. Jia then opened the box the homebuyer had meant to give his father. Immediately, she understood where In Beom had gone. She knew that when a person was possessed by a ghost, they would often inherit some of its habits. She hurried to the homebuyer's father's house and asked him whether he had noticed anything unusual. Perhaps someone resembling his son had been lurking nearby. She then revealed a painful truth that his son had not taken his own life. Handing the box to the grieving father, Jia let him open it. Inside was a brand new pair of glasses. The homebuyer had noticed that his father was still wearing an old pair and had repeatedly urged him to replace them. In his letter, the homebuyer had written about his dreams. He had never planned to take his own life. Instead, he had been full of hope, wanting to start fresh and earn money to take care of his father. Hiding in the shadows, In Beom silently watched as the long-standing misunderstanding between father and son was resolved. Satisfied, he turned to leave, only to find Jia standing behind him. Caught off guard, he immediately jumped into his car and sped away. Jia chased after him, but he was determined to escape. Later, In Beom and Jio moved on to their next scheme. This time, they pretended to be devout Buddhists, visiting a temple to take advantage of the free meals offered to the needy. While eating, they observed the people distributing the food. At the same time, a major real estate situation was unfolding. Yunhei, the director of the country's largest fine art institute, was trying to sell its original headquarters. However, the sale was proving difficult due to persistent rumors that the building was haunted. There were also rumors that Yunhei had poisoned her husband. Seeing how strong and composed she was, Ji-yo suspected that she wouldn't easily believe in ghosts, but In Beom had already devised a plan. He had done his research and discovered that, aside from Yoon-hae, there was another key figure in the institute, her husband's half-brother. In Beom theorized that this man was the one spreading ghost stories. His goal was to sabotage the institute, forcing Yoon-hae to step down so he could take control. In Beom's strategy was simple: gather evidence proving that the younger brother was responsible for spreading the ghost rumors. Once they had proof, they could use it as leverage. Elsewhere, a realtor named Jo-sung was showing a house to a young couple. Initially, the pair seemed interested, but as they reached the staircase, the boyfriend suddenly froze. He swore he could hear strange noises coming from the second floor. Jo-sung quickly explained that a painter lived upstairs, hoping to ease their concerns, but the boyfriend, still curious, insisted on checking it out. As he climbed the stairs, a foul odor hit him. Alarmed, Jo-sung rushed ahead to the painter's room. Then he saw the painter was lying motionless on the floor. That night, Ji-yo arrived at the house, immediately sensing a spirit's presence. The ghost led her to the rooftop before darting back inside the painter's room. From what she observed, she realized this was no ordinary wandering soul, it was a victim of injustice. Determined to find answers, Ji-yo followed the spirit, tracking its movements. Eventually, she identified the final location. It sought the Fine Art Institute. At the same time, In Beom had already infiltrated the institute. He set up hidden cameras and projectors on the walls. That night, the employees at the institute were terrified when they saw what appeared to be a ghostly apparition. Panicked, they rushed to find the manager. But when they returned, the ghost had transformed into an airy figure inside one of the institute's paintings. Seeing this, the manager bolted in fear. The next day, Ji-yo arrived at the Fine Art Institute and unexpectedly ran into In Beom. However, before they could speak, the vengeful spirit appeared. A wave of cold swept through Ji-yo's body. She quickly set up a protective barrier around In Beom to keep him from interfering. In Beom noticed a sign above her head about to fall. He rushed forward and pushed her out of harm's way. Because of this, Ji-yo lost the opportunity to see the ghost's true face. However, she made another surprising discovery whenever In Beom was near. The chilling aura that accompanied the spirit seemed to vanish. Then Yoon-hae arrived. In Beom took the opportunity to introduce his profession. However, he was soon asked to leave the Fine Arts Institute. Meanwhile, Yoon-hae invited Ji-yo to stay for a conversation about the institute, revealing that Yoon-hae was already aware of Ji-yo's experience in assisting other companies with real estate and property sales. Yoon-hae then proposed that Ji-yo take charge of revitalizing the Fine Arts Institute, ultimately selling its land for a high price. At that moment, his younger brother arrived, immediately blaming Yoon-hae for the institute's failing business, which had led to persistent rumors of hauntings. As Ji-yo stepped outside, she ran into In Beom in front of the institute. The two of them started contemplating ways to prove their sincerity to each other, ensuring that the contract they were discussing would be mutually beneficial. Surprisingly, their conversation led them to a swift agreement. In Beom then got into Ji-yo's car and began texting Ji-yo, recalling an earlier moment at the institute when Ji-yo had touched his hand and smiled in an unusual way. In Beom couldn't help but feel that he had just played the role of a hero rescuing a damsel in distress. He began to believe that his masculinity had captivated Ji-yo, making her fall for him. Shortly after, they both headed to Daebak Real Estate. Upon entering the house, Ji-yo discreetly observed In Beom. Eventually, she allowed him to go upstairs, a challenge that no ordinary shaman had ever successfully overcome. Yet, In Beom climbed the stairs effortlessly, with Ji-yo following behind. She revealed that the room held the spirit of her mother. When Ji-yo was a child, she had witnessed a possessed man strangling her mother to death. She recounted the traumatic event and promised In Beom a generous sum of money if he would perform the exorcism ritual to free her mother's spirit. As the ritual commenced, Ji-yo noticed that her mother's soul was attempting to enter In Beom's body. She reached for a hairpin, but in the end, she couldn't bring herself to stab him. The ritual failed and In Beom collapsed unconscious. In his dreams, he relived the horrifying moment when his uncle murdered Ji-yo's mother. Upon waking, Ji-yo handed him a necklace, explaining that it would protect him from possession by vengeful spirits. The necklace bore a striking resemblance to the one his uncle had given him in childhood. This realization led In Beom to suspect a deeper connection between his uncle's mysterious accident and Ji-yo's mother's death. Determined to uncover the truth, he agreed to work as Ji-yo's special shaman. He even volunteered to train alongside her. Though Ji-yo had practiced exorcism since childhood under her mother's guidance, she had never directly encountered spirits. Her training had only involved using puppets, which made the process feel ordinary. Her mother had once told her that an exorcist carried the responsibility of helping wandering souls find peace. Many spirits remain trapped in the world due to their unresolved regrets and suffering. It was an exorcist's duty to help them forget their past pain and guide them toward reincarnation by offering them the 5-flavored tea of forgetfulness. Jia proposed that In Beom sign a contract to solidify their partnership, but he declined, joking that he refused to get involved with multi-level marketing schemes. In response, Jia instructed her assistant to offer him a salary of 2 million won for the shaman position. The assistant initially objected, deeming the pay excessive, but upon learning that In Beom had successfully ascended to the 2nd floor, his attitude shifted completely. She became a mediator, encouraging both parties to finalize the agreement. When In Beom left, the assistant urged Jia to consider signing him on, as his abilities were rare. In Beom's presence not only helped regulate Jia's body temperature, but also allowed him to absorb the memories of spirits, both of which were advantageous to her. However, Jia remained confident that she could handle everything alone. The assistant then reminded her of a past incident when she had nearly lost her life while performing an exorcism. Meanwhile, after returning home, In Beom informed Chihyeo of his decision to work with Debic Real Estate. However, Chihyeo misunderstood his intentions, believing that In Beom was abandoning their business. Feeling betrayed, Chihyeo confronted him with a barrage of questions. In truth, In Beom's primary goal was to investigate whether his uncle's murder was connected to Debic Real Estate. After careful consideration, Jia and her assistant eventually agreed to collaborate with him. Upon reviewing the contract, In Beom noticed an unusual clause stating that, for the duration of his employment as a shaman, he was prohibited from engaging in any romantic or sexual relationships. Frustrated by the invasion of his privacy, he couldn't believe the restriction. The assistant then clarified that shamans needed to maintain purity to properly control spirits with strong yin energy. Otherwise, their lives could be at risk. Hearing this, the contract was officially signed. In Beom and Chihyeo were assigned to stay in a small restaurant across from Debic Real Estate. Additionally, the assistant arranged for someone to monitor their activities while delivering their meals. Despite this new arrangement, In Beom and Chihyeo had no intention of abandoning their business at the Fine Arts Institute. One evening, they attempted to scare Yoonhae by fabricating a ghost sighting. However, their plan fell apart when Yoonhae received a sudden phone call and left. Chihyeo called In Beom to update him on the failed plan, but at that moment, In Beom was training with Jia and couldn't respond. That night, Jia took In Beom to a house where a painter had died. Lighting incense, she suddenly felt a chill, and the room's lights flickered on and off, clear signs of a lingering spirit. She searched the space carefully until the ghost finally revealed itself. Raising a mystical gun, she pursued it, cornering the entity on the stairs. Just as the ghost was about to show its true form, the incense burned out, and the spirit vanished. Jia's body grew cold from the encounter, so she instinctively grabbed In Beom's hand to absorb his warmth. Misinterpreting the gesture, In Beom felt pleased, but Jia quickly clarified that exorcisms caused her body temperature to drop, and physical contact helped restore her warmth. Amused by his newfound importance, In Beom saw himself a unique and invaluable shaman. The next day, In Beom and Jia discussed the Fine Arts Institute. Based on her observations, she noted that On-High had once deactivated all security systems and spent an evening alone in the institute's quietest room. She had also purchased an unusual insurance policy that ensured she wouldn't lose money even if the exhibition was extended. In fact, she stood to profit. This struck In Beom as suspicious. Meanwhile, Chihyeo learned that Jia's mother had tragically died during an exorcism ritual. This reminded In Beom that Jia always burned incense when performing exorcisms, fueling his belief that the incense might contain hallucinogenic properties. Determined to prove his theory, he waited until Jia left the house and then searched for the incense burner. While rummaging through her belongings, he stumbled upon a photograph of her mother. As he picked it up, Jia's mother's spirit suddenly appeared beside him. His phone battery drained instantly, but he remained unaware of the paranormal presence. Unfazed, he continued his search until he found the incense burner. Just then, an eerie noise echoed through the house. He followed the sound to discover Jia's mother's ghost knocking over shoes. Panic set in as he covered his mouth in fear. At that moment, Jia returned home. Hearing a sudden noise, Jia headed upstairs. A pile of shoes had mysteriously tumbled over, but instead of being startled, In Beom simply knelt down and began tidying them up. As he sorted through the shoes, he casually remarked that Jia seemed to have a habit of buying pairs with nearly identical designs. Her mother silently took note of his comment. When Jia entered the room, she didn't notice anything unusual. Assuming her mother had made the mess, she began scolding her. Meanwhile, as In Beom discreetly moved through the space, Jia caught sight of him. Just as he was about to be caught, Chihyeo created a diversion, allowing In Beom to make a quick escape. He excitedly told Chihyeo that he had managed to steal the incense burner. However, when he checked his hands, he realized he had mistakenly grabbed a pumpkin instead. Meanwhile, Jia continued her investigation into the spirit of the painter. Though she had only caught a brief glimpse of the ghost's face, it was enough to begin piecing together information. Unfortunately, Additionally, due to the severe damage to the ghost's fingerprints, confirming his identity proved difficult. What she did learn was that a man named Byung-ho had passed away a month ago due to a brain injury. After receiving the report from her assistant, Ji-ya decided to take In Beom to the Fine Art Institute to uncover any potential connection between Byung-ho and the institution. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Yoon-hae and Mr. Cho. However, he immediately noticed an odd softness to his palms, as if they hadn't held a paintbrush in quite some time. Ji-ya got straight to the point. She bluntly asked Mr. Cho if his paintings had actually been created by someone else. The artist's expression instantly shifted, confirming her suspicions. She then approached a particular painting and, without hesitation, sliced through its top layer with a knife. Beneath it, a hidden self-portrait was revealed, the true identity of the restless spirit. Under Ji-ya's relentless questioning, the painter finally admitted the name of the real artist behind his work. Yoon-hae immediately called the painter to her office. In an attempt to cover up the scandal, the painter claimed he had previously hired an assistant to help with his work. However, Yoon-hae saw right through his excuse. She warned him to wait until the exhibition concluded before quietly retiring. Frustrated and cursing under his breath, he stormed off to the basement. Later, as he got into his car, ready to leave, something terrifying happened. The vehicle suddenly shut off, and the windshield became covered in bloody handprints. Fear gripped him completely. Meanwhile, after leaving the museum, Ji-ya warned In Beom that everything related to the exorcism had to remain confidential. If the truth were exposed, it could lead to severe consequences, even death. Though In Beom verbally agreed, he later contacted Ji-hyo and instructed him to gather evidence to blackmail Mr. Cho. Shortly after, the two of them arrived at the painter's home. However, In Beom suddenly realized he had forgotten the protective exorcism pendant that Ji-ya had given him. Ignoring this oversight, he proceeded into the house with Ji-hyo. The moment they stepped inside, they were met with an eerie sight. The entire house was covered in various talismans. Clearly, Mr. Cho had been tormented by the restless spirit for the past few days. Desperate, the artist reviewed the incriminating video that In Beom had brought. He then quickly handed over a bag of money, promising to pay the rest once the ghost was gone. But there was a problem. In Beom had no idea how to perform an exorcism. He suggested that Mr. Cho seek Ji-ya's help instead. However, before they could take more than a few steps, a sudden gust of cold wind blew through the room, sending the talismans fluttering to the ground. Mr. Cho collapsed in fear, begging them not to abandon him. But it was too late. The spirit had already possessed In Beom. His eyes darkened with fury as he turned to Mr. Cho, his gaze filled with hatred. At that moment, Ji-ya arrived at the scene, having sensed something was wrong. She rushed in only to find In Beom strangling Mr. Cho. Without hesitation, she launched herself forward, delivering a forceful kick that sent In Beom flying. Quickly, she placed the exorcism necklace around his neck. The malevolent spirit immediately fled from In Beom's body. When In Beom regained consciousness, Ji-hyo and Mr. Cho were staring at him in terror. Completely unaware of what had just happened, he turned to Ji-ya and asked why she was there. Instead of answering, she simply walked away. Because he had attacked Mr. Cho, In Beom was taken to the police station. However, Ji-ya soon arrived and arranged for his release. Returning to Mr. Cho's house, Ji-ya prepared for another exorcism. She lit incense, intent on burning all the paintings to summon Byung-ho's spirit. As expected, the ghost soon appeared. Seizing the moment, Ji-ya fired her mystical gun, trapping the spirit. She then shouted for In Beom to remove his protective necklace, allowing the ghost to enter him. But at the last second, In Beom hesitated. The traumatic memories of being possessed flashed through his mind. Seeing the incense about to burn out, Ji-ya had no choice. She ran over and ripped the necklace off him herself. Instantly, Byung-ho's spirit entered In Beom's body. Acting quickly, Ji-ya took out a hairpin and stabbed him in the chest, completing the ritual. In Beom gasped as a rush of emotions flooded through him. Byung-ho's final memories before death played out in his mind. The truth was heartbreaking. Byung-ho had done everything in his power to save his terminally ill wife. As the exorcism ended, the spirit faded away, but its lingering emotions remained within In Beom. He turned to Ji-ya and demanded to know what had just entered his body. She calmly explained that it was the lingering pain the spirit couldn't let go of before passing. Though the ghost was gone, remnants of its presence would linger in him for a few days before naturally fading. With the ordeal over, the two returned to Daebak real estate. Before they parted ways, Ji-ya gently placed the exorcism pendant back around In Beom's neck. She advised him to take it easy for the next few days and focus on activities that would help him relax. As he reflected on everything that had happened, In Beom couldn't help but marvel at Ji-ya's strength. She had been an exorcist for 10 years, enduring things he could barely handle after a single experience. With a newfound respect for her, he sighed and muttered, "I don't know how you do this alone." Ji-ya simply smiled.